Thank you very much, Jesse. I really appreciate that. It's a great pleasure to be here at Google today to talk about human engine optimization. And with reflection, it became very clear to me that Google is the perfect place to speak about new pathways to health. The reason is that the search for internet sites and the search for optimal health actually have a surprising amount in common. Let's explore. Well, this is right from your pages on algorithms to determine ranking. And in fact, how our health evolves follows much the same kind of algorithm. For our health is largely determined in terms of ranking. And the ranking is affected by great content, which is really nutrition, what we bring inside, what becomes part of us, and also the quality links that we set up. What are we linking to? What are our bodies linking to? And what are we associating with? What is our environment? And just as those are the key determinants for search placement, they really are the key determinants for our own health. The areas that I'm going to be speaking about, unfortunately, are not front and center in conventional medical care. That is the role of nutrition and the role of mind-body interventions. These are areas that, despite my training in top 10 medical centers for residency and for cardiology training, these were areas that somehow never managed to become part of my training nor of typical physicians. So what we have done was to establish a nonprofit, the Gaples Institute for Integrative Cardiology. And the sole mission of this nonprofit is to promote education for both healthcare professionals and to the community, to promote natural approaches to health. Natural approaches emphasizing nutrition and the role of mind-body interventions. Unfortunately, there's no financial return on investment that's seen at first glance from this sort of initiative. And it requires a nonprofit to bring this front and center. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in our nonprofit. And I'll speak a little bit more about it as our talk unfolds. But I really invite all of you to, if this mission resonates with you, to share this journey and to help us as we move forward. Because I think the journey of taking these natural approaches to health and making them front and center is going to require a grassroots effort that will come from all of you and to help change the system, because it definitely could stand some change. And why? Because what is it that we're currently prioritizing in medicine? Well, I can tell you in cardiology, most people believe that the most potent intervention that we have available to us are things, as you can see here. This is a stent. A stent is a device used to prop open diseased and narrowed blood vessels. And many people would consider it to be the most effective, the highest tech system that we have in cardiology training. But it might surprise you to know that unless you're having a heart attack at the moment it's inserted or have a very unstable sort of chest pain, that when these devices are inserted, do you know what the data shows the likelihood of either preventing a heart attack or saving a life would be? There's very clear data on it, and the answer is the risk reduction is zero. That unless you're in the throes of a heart attack, this will not reduce the likelihood of a future heart attack or save your life. On the other hand, what about the role of nutrition? Well, nutrition, which gets little more than lip service in typical encounters, has been shown, as I'll show you, to reduce the risk of a heart problem by 72%. And again, this is not in the fringe literature. This is in very hardcore, very strongly peer-reviewed medical literature. So my goal is to kind of rebalance this relationship a little bit, and that is to still, see the value of these incredible, marvelous, high technology tools that we have available, but also to put them into perspective and how much more we can do by emphasizing the role of nutrition and lifestyle measures to prevent the need for these other higher technology tools that are available. So let's talk a little bit about the data. I mentioned to you the 72% reduction. Where does that come from? It comes from this study, this Mediterranean Lyon heart study. And basically what they did in this study was to randomize a group of individuals who had had a heart attack to two diet groups. One diet group was advised just to be on a low-fat, kind of watch what you eat diet. The other group was advised to be on a Mediterranean diet. And what does that mean? Mediterranean diet meant try to increase the number of vegetables and fruit that you're eating. Try and reduce the refined carbs in your diet and eat more whole grains. The predominant oil should be canola and olive oil, and to eat less red meat and more fish. Basically, that was the Mediterranean diet. And what did that Mediterranean diet achieve? Take a look. Unbelievable. In terms of the graph, it's showing the percentage of individuals without a heart problem. So you want to be on the top part of this graph. And you can see that the Mediterranean diet group compared to the prudent diet group did much, much better over the several-year course of the study. That's point number one. It made a huge difference. In fact, a 72% fewer event rate by the end of the study. But that's not it, because many people believe that dietary changes, take a long time to happen, and then when they do, they're very small. But you can see here the curves begin to splay well within the first year. So we see the changes very quickly. You don't have to wait a long time to see them. And as you can see, the magnitude of change is quite profound. And when you eat a Mediterranean diet, the fascinating thing that we're just now uncovering is that you're not only helping your own health, but you're improving the health of your next generation. Why? Take a look at this. This study shows that mothers who eat a Mediterranean diet during their pregnancy reduce the risk of childhood asthma in their children by 70%. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? So many people believe that diseases are mostly genetically programmed and that whatever your genes will dictate is the path that you'll take. But we know now that genes need to be activated. They're kind of a default. They're kind of a set point where you might normally settle out to. But that set point, like a thermostat, the temperature, despite the fact the thermostat is set a certain way in your home, you can alter the temperature in your home by doing many other things. Opening the window, putting a fire in, you can feel cooler or warmer by the clothing that you wear. So there's many different ways to alter the final outcome apart from whatever is in your genes. And this is a fascinating thing, that we're helping the health of future generations by the food that we eat. And so I think that when we kind of drill down and look more into the components of the Mediterranean diet, that we really need to start thinking about vegetables and fruit in a very different way than we might normally. Normally you'd think of them as maybe a little bit something healthy or something to eat as a snack, but I actually look at them as nothing less than medication. Medication changes the course of your health, so can fruit and vegetables. And let me kind of show you a little bit more in terms of details. One of the things that I noticed in your cafeteria, which by the way is the healthiest spot I have ever seen of a workplace to eat, so I really commend all the wonderful people involved with that, which is wonderful not only in the type of food, but the way it's displayed, which is incredibly important, and also to prove a point that many people feel that delicious and healthy are mutually exclusive. And what you have here proves that, in fact, they very easily can be one and the same thing. And so incredible benefit not only for your health, but for your working efficiency and just for quality of life. It's amazing. So the thing that I saw in your eating place today, a lot of dark green leafy vegetables, and for very good reason. Take a look at this study. This study showed that for each serving of dark green leafy vegetables, you reduce the risk of a heart problem, get a load of this, by 23%. And when I speak to doctors, I ask, are you asking patients how many servings of dark green leafy vegetables they're eating? My guess is that none of you have been asked that by your doctors, but you should be, because it's very potent. Again, trying to get this sort of information more into everyday practice. Take a look, amazing. So the question is, why? What is so special about spinach? And can't we reduce the healthful items in spinach to a pill? Because it would be, more simple to take a pill and be done with it and not need to worry about keeping food fresh. The answer is, we don't know how to do that. And the reason is, let's take a look and see what's inside of spinach. This is the ingredient list if you want to make spinach. Take a look at that. Take a look at everything that nature has provided in such a simple package that is there for us with all the incredible benefits. Is it no wonder that we can't replicate that, all of these constituents, perhaps in the proper proportion to achieve what nature has provided for us for the taking? It's really, I think, kind of a spiritual journey to see, when they talk about whole foods, this is something, it's actually very complex, but yet something incredible because the complexity has been sorted out and already been established to be incredibly helpful. Let's go into the element of fruit. You might have heard about the purple pill, but I've got a different version of the purple pill. This is the natural one. And blueberries and strawberries have a very unique sort of antioxidant, which actually enlarges blood vessels and helps to lower blood pressure. They're called anthocyanins. And take a look at this study result. This was just published in Circulation, the most prestigious cardiology journal, just a few weeks ago. What did they find? They looked at 93,000 women studied for 18 years. So a very long, very large study. And they found that women who have 3 or more doses, I like to refer to it, or servings of either blueberries or strawberries, what did it achieve for them? A 34% reduced risk of a heart attack. What a delicious way to reduce your risk of a problem. Unbelievable, unbelievable. I know we're going to sample some good medicine after this talk, but how simple it is and how delicious. So just to give you a visual, in the Lyon study, the Mediterranean study that I referred to, what did they eat to achieve those results? They ate vegetables which visually, in terms of amount, equal the amount of vegetables that you see here. These would be equivalent to 2 servings of vegetables, and the size of the salad plate is the size kind of a side salad that you might see in a restaurant. But you can see it's not a typical salad of iceberg lettuce and croutons. This is a salad filled with dark green leafy vegetables and a whole plethora of colors of different vegetables to go with that. So you can see it's quite a large stocked side salad. So 2 of those, and 1 with lunch perhaps, 1 with dinner, and then a side portion of vegetables. That would be kind of the total that we're looking for in the course of a day. If you don't like salads, it could be steamed vegetables or some other assortment. But in terms of quantity, that's what we're thinking about. And then when it comes to fruit, it doesn't take much to get to what they ate in this Mediterranean Lyon study. It would be a side salad of a side portion of berries, as shown here. You might eat with breakfast, and then an apple to go with it later in the day. That's all you would need to eat. But even this amount is much more than the average American is consuming. And yet, if the average American did consume this amount, our health would be incredibly impacted. So just to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about carbohydrates, although this may not pertain to the people here in this room, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, has estimated that by 2050, if current trends continue, 1 out of 3 adults will be diabetic. So it's a huge, huge issue. And I'd love to talk to you about some of the foods that we eat and how they contribute to sugar level. I believe you'll find many of them in surprising ways. So let's talk a little bit about a concept called the glycemic load. Glycemic load refers to the amount of sugar that gets released in the bloodstream after you eat certain foods. And it's indexed for the serving size of a particular food. It's called glycemic load. In foods that will release a great deal of sugar into your bloodstream, which obviously is undesirable, have a high glycemic load. And the number for high load is 20 or greater. A low glycemic load food, which contributes relatively minimal amount of blood sugar, is a value of 10 or under. and in between 10 and 20 are intermediate values. Okay? Remember those numbers, okay? Because there's going to be a test. Okay. First part of our test, a glazed donut. Glazed donut. What would you, if over 20 is high and under 10 is low for glycemic load, what would you guess would be the glycemic load of a glazed donut? 30, 35, something like that. It sounds right because it's very sweet, sweet as can be. Well, glycemic load, 14. 14, intermediate. Intermediate. We'll talk about that, why it's surprising and why it's important. So a lot of people know that a glazed donut is not a super healthy food, right? You know, whether they like to eat them or not, they know they're eating something not very healthy. So what people might do instead, especially if they have a sugar problem, is to switch to something that seems healthier. And that something very well could be a bagel, right? Not nearly as sweet, not sweet at all, in fact, and doesn't seem fried, seems much healthier. What would you think the glycemic load of a bagel might be? Must be a little bit lower than a donut, right? Because it's not sweet at all. Obviously, a setup. And take a look, the glycemic load, 33. Now, if I asked you a few moments ago that eating a donut will contribute half the sugar load of eating a bagel, you probably would be very surprised, right? So the take-home message is what? Eat more donuts. No, not the take-home message. But the idea is that this is surprising. The take-home messages both are not a great breakfast choice. So why is it? The take-home message is something does not need to be sweet in order to raise your sugar level. Why? Because starches are just made of sugar molecules arranged differently. And even though they're not sweet to the taste, starches, when they're digested by the body, are released into sugar. And therefore, the donut doesn't weigh very much. Even though it's sweet as can be, the amount of carb in a donut is relatively less. It's not much in terms of actual weight. The bagel, on the other hand, weighs much more. There's much more carb. And again, even though it's not sweet tasting, that starch gets converted into sugar. So the best choice for breakfast would be none of the above. You know, not the donut and not to switch to the bagel. And it's certainly if you've got issues related to sugar, if you've been told that your sugar is bordering high or beginning to be a little bit high, even not in the diabetic range, good thing to keep in mind. Okay, let's look at another example, potato. We've got a white potato and a sweet potato. What would you think the glycemic load of a baked potato might be, white potato? Take a guess? 27? Okay, let's take a look. How about pretty close, 29. 29. Isn't it something? About the 2 glazed donuts. And I doubt very many people, again, because the potato is not sweet at all, it's really hard to understand that eating something like that would raise your sugar level, but it would, quite a bit. And that's even before all the health problems of putting the sour cream and cheese and other stuff on. Okay, what about a sweet potato? Now, a sweet potato is sweet, right? So its glycemic load must be much higher than the white potato. Don't you think? Yeah. Now, take a look. Huge difference. Glycemic load of 15, it's about half. Plus a lot more nutrients in the sweet potato. So again, it's not intuitive. The reason I show you this, a lot of people think, well, I know what to eat and eating, you know, is natural. Well, a lot you do know and a lot is intuitive. But a good portion is not, and the fact that a sweet potato would contribute much less to your sugar than a white potato is an example of something not particularly intuitive, but important. Okay. The other thing that I saw here in your food space, which was wonderful, was really a predominance of whole grains. But a lot of people don't know what exactly is a whole grain. They know they've got some vague sense that it's something healthy, but what is a whole grain? Well, a whole grain has 3 parts that are really important. What was in the grain to begin with when it was grown? It's the bran, the germ, and the endosperm. The bran is the outer covering of the whole grain. And that's where all the fiber is. There's some B vitamins and flavonoids, which are antioxidants. So a lot of healthy stuff there. The yellow shown here is the germ. Also very healthy. It's got antioxidants and phytochemicals, a lot of healthy ingredients. And what's left? The larger portion of the grain is called endosperm. And that is really nothing but starch. Nothing but starch. And when a grain is refined, guess what? It's the endosperm, the starch, that is the part that remains. And that's why eating that in exclusion is not a very healthy step to take. So let's talk a little bit about what are some examples of whole grains. Some of them may be very familiar to you, others probably not so. So we're going to do our whole grains on display. One of them is oatmeal. So a lot of people know oatmeal is a very healthy choice, and that's absolutely right. Another one which has become more popular, we introduced it recently in a group of healthcare, in a conference for healthcare individuals, and it was labeled, and people said, what is this quinoa? No, not quinoa. It's quinoa. Become very, very popular, very high in protein among whole grains. It's a complete protein, so a great choice and something I'm sure which is familiar to you. Another whole grain probably familiar to you is brown rice. Brown rice as opposed to white or sticky rice. Much healthier, much lower glycemic load than white sticky rice, a lot more nutrients. Then other whole grains, you might be accustomed to this one in soup, barley, but it can be eaten steamed, very delicious. Now, others that you may not be as familiar with, bulgur, which many people think will be that in the next one, the new quinoa. Bulgur, very healthy, great whole grain. Another one, which you may have heard about or not, is farro. Very healthy whole grain, delicious when steamed. Just some examples of things to think about. There is another whole grain that you're probably eating fairly regularly that you don't even know is a whole grain. You're getting kind of a freebie. I'm not sure you're eating it in the healthiest way. Any idea? It's a Saturday night food. Out to the movies? Popcorn, you bet. Who knew it was a whole grain? And very healthy until you put all the bad oils and fats and things that you might find in the movie theater. But air pop popcorn with maybe a little bit of olive oil, a tiny bit of garlic, or just a pinch of salt, a very small amount, incredibly healthy snack. Not so in the movie theater, perhaps, because of all the saturated fat in the sauce that's added. So my question to you, what becomes of a whole grain once it's been processed? What are the kind of products that we can get? Well, we strip away the bran, strip away the germ, strip away the endosperm. And let's see, when you look at the bran, we can make something like bran flakes, which are truly high in fiber. Might be a good choice for a cold cereal. And the germ, if you ever wondered, if you've seen a bottle of wheat germ and wondered what this is, it's actually a portion of the wheat that you can see now, the whole grain. Very healthy. It is an excellent source of vitamin E and folic acid. Very healthy thing. So what's left? The starch. And what do you make of that? Here you go. This is it. This is the endosperm. So I hate to say, but when you're eating this, you're actually eating a mouthful of. There you go. So think about that next time. The other thing about whole grains is now, you know, the food industry knows that people are looking for the whole grain name. And they're also looking at the label of grains very carefully. And what they often will write is multigrain this or multigrain that. And it sounds like a healthy thing, like lots of grains. But in fact, multigrain just means multiple grains. It doesn't mean that they're whole grains. They could be multiple refined grains. So don't be fooled. As a matter of fact, there was an item labeled as a multigrain baguette. And when you looked at the ingredients, there are truly multiple grains, but unless they're labeled whole grains, they typically are not. And none of these are labeled whole grains. So again, be careful when it says multigrain. It's not necessarily the whole grain product. What you want is 100% whole grain to be listed somewhere. Wanted to now switch gears a bit to talk just briefly about nuts. Nuts are incredibly healthy for a variety of reasons. They've got lots of healthy ingredients to them, constituents that you really want to take advantage. Again, another item that I saw in ample supply here at Google. Nuts have phytosterols. They're a natural plant oil that actually reduces the absorption of cholesterol from our diet, which is a good thing. It's got lots of magnesium, which has lots of healthy properties, including lowering of blood pressure. Vitamin E, which again, when it's found in food, has been found to be very healthy, but when it's taken in isolated pill form, has not been shown to be beneficial. And then nuts have a lot of fat, but predominantly they're the healthy monounsaturated fat, which is a good fat. So lots of good things. So what happens when we eat nuts? Take a look at this. 37% lower risk of heart disease by eating 4 handfuls of nuts per week. That's the dose. Almonds and walnuts have been best studied, but in this one study they really looked at a whole variety of nuts. Take a look at this. Now, may I ask you, how many of you have been advised by your doctor to eat nuts throughout the week? You know, my guess is very few. Many people are concerned about the fact that even healthy fats have a significant number of calories, and they're worried about the caloric intake. Well, that does seem like an issue, but studies, interestingly, of people who are overweight who add nuts into their diet show that they don't, for the most part, gain weight. The reason is that nuts are very satiating. They'll make you feel full. And so generally when people eat nuts, even with all the calories, they end up eating far less of other foods. So they're replacing unhealthy calories with much healthier ones. And sometimes they end up being filled up to such a degree that they end up eating fewer calories in net and losing weight that way. So these have shown you some examples of the incredible health benefits of fruit, vegetables, dark green leafy ones in particular, strawberries and blueberries, and nuts. So just a sampling. There's many others that we could share about, but in our limited time together, those are the main areas of nutrition I wanted to focus on. But I wanted to now kind of return to the mission of what I talked about, to make this sort of education about nutrition more and the practice of nutritional advice to be front and center in modern medicine. And why is it not now? Well, let me share some information with you that there are accreditation requirements for training programs in medicine. And for training to be a cardiologist, a heart specialist, the accreditation document is 32 pages. You can see some of the pages shown here. And of those 32 pages, what I did was search for the word nutrition in this 32-page document. As you can see here, the title, the program requirements for graduate medical education in cardiovascular disease. And as I did my search, nutrition was found on no occasion, 0. And the same for food and all the words that you could substitute for nutrition. So in all of that, that is the issue that we're seeking to address, to put this front and center. And we've started to do that in our work, the Gaples Institute, in conjunction with other groups. We put on this program, for instance, Cardiology Cooks, where we took cardiology trainees, shown here, and gave them some nutrition information and actually put aprons on them and had them taught by a gourmet chef how they can actually use healthy cooking techniques in their own lives, for the interesting reason that when healthcare people adopt healthy behaviors themselves, they're much more likely to counsel their patients about healthy lifestyle behaviors. And probably all of you can sense that. When you adopt healthy behaviors, you start to run, aren't you more likely to tell your friends about you or your children about running? You're kind of a role model and you're excited about it. So that's one of the agendas that we have to try and get people more personally involved. So no talk about healthy lifestyle would be complete without mentioning exercise, and we'll just mention a bit about it. The interesting thing about exercise is that little goes a very long way. 30 minutes of walking a day will cut your heart risk by 14%. And the more you do, the greater the benefit. So, but just walking 30 minutes. And interestingly, it even gets better than that. Because if you break up that 30 minutes into 3 10-minute blocks, you get the same benefit, even more in some studies, but certainly the same. So how many people don't have 10-minute blocks of continuous walking they can do either to or from the workplace or around your workplace or before or after work? It's not really hard to do. but it's very potent medicine. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about another area that unfortunately is not addressed in typical encounters in conventional medicine, and that is the fact that we know so intuitively that there's a connection between what happens in our mind and what happens in our body. And really, there's really not even a separation. We tend to think of them as two distinct areas, but they actually are so interrelated. There really is not a meaningful distinction. We just think of them differently. And even as I show this graphic, the heart and the brain and the rest of the body, it's an ecosystem. They're tremendously related, so we can't talk about one without the other. And the studies are very convincing that our thinking and our levels of stress and our levels of positive emotions make a huge impact on our health. So our goal is, as much as possible, to get to Happy Road. So the question is, how do we do that? How do we do that? What's available? Some interesting things, just by way of background. Can't do this study in people, thankfully, but take a look at what we see in this study. The importance of social interaction and touch. Do you think that would make a difference for our health? You might think so, maybe in an intangible kind of more general way, but look at how it affected very specifically. That they took a group of rabbits prone to developing atherosclerotic plaque, and half of them, they just fed them their chow and their water and allowed them the necessities of life. But the other half, they fed the same way, but the rabbits were regularly handled by the people in the lab and petted regularly. So at the end of the study period, they looked at the bodies, they looked internally in the rabbits, and what did they find? Again, the only difference between the two groups was one group was handled and petted and the other group was not. 60% fewer plaques in rabbits that were regularly handled. So it shows you the incredible importance. I mean, you could figure out all kinds of jokes and dating lines from this, but really the importance, I think, is to show you the social interaction and perhaps the value of even human touch. We know that in medical encounters, that feeling someone, even just touching, when doctors examine you, part of, I think, that interaction is really a trust and kind of a building of a relationship. But even beyond that, the social part, the social connectedness, how critical that is for our health. Now, what can you do to improve your own health? Take a look at this study, just published again in one of the highest quality cardiology journals just a few months ago. They took 201 patients who had coronary artery disease, and they treated them medically exactly the same. So this wasn't a test of whether one group of medicines was better than another. Same group of medicine. Half of them were randomized to a group that did meditation twice a day. The other half were treated identically, but no meditation. What did they find? At the end of the study period, 5 years, they found 48% fewer heart problems in the group that meditated. 48%. It's astounding. It's astounding. I can tell you there is no drug in cardiology that confers a 48% benefit in any category. In any category. So I'm just saying that, again, not to replace conventional care, but certainly shouldn't this be part of it? Shouldn't this be part for patients, after a heart problem, and more importantly, even before, to prevent this, the bad things from happening? How potent? And again, not part of training at all. Not part of training at all. Next, again, talking about the quality links that we make. Again, very important for web searches. Also important for our own health. Again, there's so many connections between what you're doing here at Google and what we need to do to improve our health. Is to make healthy links. There's a term called biophilia, which is our attraction, our longing for things that are alive, for nature. And although intuitively we have that longing, what are the health implications of it? Take a look at this study. Fascinating. What they did was to look at the recovery period of a group of patients recovering from surgery. Now, half of the patients, this is in an older period when hospital rooms had a bed close to a window, which in this case had a view of trees and a nature scene, or the bed that was closer to the hospital hallway, which didn't have a view of nature. So they looked at patients who were assigned to either the bed by the window of the nature view or the bed by the hallway. And they looked to see, was there any difference in how they recovered from surgery? So what did they find? They found that the group was facing the wall needed far more medications for pain than the group that was viewing the trees, the window group. Isn't that something? Isn't it something that the recovery period was affected by the proximity to nature? Again, it doesn't affect what we usually think of as conventional medical care, whether they're by the window or not. But in fact, some people think you're by the hallway, you might get more attention and so forth. But it was actually quite the opposite. Again, showing the power of our attraction to nature. Another aspect of what we can do that affects our stress level or positively really makes us more relaxed are things that involve breathing exercises or breath work. Much of yoga does that, meditation does that, and there's actually some data showing that we can reduce blood pressure by a series of programmed breathing exercises. And in this study that I'm going to show you here, this was a study that used an electronic device to kind of just guide your breathing exercises, but in the long run, this electronic device was just a guide to help in a breathing exercise. Breathing exercises you can do in many different ways. Usually involves being conscious of your breath, ending up usually slowing down your breathing, more regular breathing, but most importantly, just trying to focus your attention specifically on your breathing and trying to filter out other things. But in this study, they showed a 15 millimeter drop in systolic, which is the top blood pressure reading, in people who did 25 minutes per week of these breathing exercises for 8 weeks. This is a big deal. It's a big deal. It's a tremendous drop, similar to that we see with some medications. Again, maybe a replacement for those with very mild problems, an additive for others, but what an important thing to do with so many other benefits. No side effects from this. Promise, no side effects. It's an amazing thing. And so I've given you a glimpse of some of the things that I think are so important in medicine, but currently so much missing in medicine. And that is what we're doing in the Gaples Institute. We're trying to, again, with a single-minded mission, to do education. There's no services or products, but just to try to get nutrition and lifestyle measures front and center in how you're getting your medical care and how your kids will get it. And also to inform the community about what they should expect in their health care and how to drive change. So by doing this, as you can see, these interventions are not minor side things that will add a tiny bit of additional help, but they're major and significant. And therefore, we really are trying to expand our reach, and by doing so, we think we're doing nothing less than saving lives. And so we invite you to join us, to partner with us in this mission, to access us through our website, through our Facebook site, and to partner. We would really welcome volunteer efforts from all of you, both on a technology side and even from a personal side, from other things, trying to get the word out. We're speaking to conferences, to national and international forums, and we would love your help to, if you feel this is important, as I do, to help partner in getting this message out. And hopefully I've convinced you throughout our talk that this, in fact, is no ordinary kitchen implement. In fact, it's nothing less than a bare metal interventional device that with your help and with your inspiration and your partnership with us will be converted into a drug-coated interventional device that looks something like this or something like this. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Any questions for Dr. Devries?
Hi. obviously a lot of companies are catching on to this idea that consumers are looking for things that are whole grain or low in saturated fats, et cetera. And with that comes a phenomenon where they try to, obviously, as you mentioned, mislead you into thinking that something is healthier than it is. Like, what would you recommend we look for besides looking for that whole grain label? Or are there any like accreditations or certifications that we should be looking for on labels when we pay more of our hard-earned money for products that we think are healthier for us?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there are many groups that are looking into kind of a stamping or a grading system. You might have seen there are a whole variety out. And not, many of them involve some arbitrary sorts of systemization, and there are no agreed upon ones. So they're still working on that. It's a very hot area. But I can give you a few very practical tips of things you can look for that might be helpful. So the one is the multigrain that I talked about. The other one, when it says made with whole grains, that's also another trick. Because made with whole grains just means that whole grains are part of the recipe. It could be that almost all of it is refined grain, but at the end they put in a bit of whole grains, and they can truthfully say made with whole grains. But when people think about it, they're thinking that all of the grains are whole grains, which may not be. So again, look for 100% whole grains. So that's one. Another common thing that I say is cholesterol-free. And they'll advertise things like cholesterol-free peanut butter, something like that, which is ridiculous because cholesterol is only found in animal products. So peanut butter could never have cholesterol unless they dumped in some butter with it. So don't pay extra for the peanut butter that's labeled cholesterol-free. So that's another thing to know a little bit about food, and don't be fooled into paying higher price for something that really doesn't make any sense. So those are really key areas. I think beyond that is you really need to look at the label, to look at the fat content, saturated fat in particular, and the salt content. Salt is a huge factor, and it is in surprising foods. Like even breads will have a good amount of salt, and some breads much more than others. Processed foods and processed cheese foods even much more. So really it's to look at the labels beyond those and to know some of the common ones that I talked to you about. Very important. And then the other thing, you can't go wrong when foods, I always tell people if it has a label, it's not the healthiest thing probably. So the whole foods, you don't need to look at the labels for spinach and kale and vegetables and nuts and fruit and those sorts of things. So those whole foods, the foods that are grown, you really can't go wrong with them. But when it comes to packaging, you have to be more careful. You're right.
Hi there.
Hi.
Okay, so I come to work and I make like really healthy choices. I'm eating my leafy greens and my blueberries, and I go home, I have a great dinner, but like last night I had a double stuffed Oreo. So my question is, did I undo all the good I did throughout the day with that, questionable choice, or can I just cut myself a break every now and then?
No, I don't think you undid all the good. I think, in the end, it's really the aggregate of everything that you do. And actually, I think, there's a margin when it gets to be probably counterproductive. But I think, to have something small, celebratory, that is really a discrete part of your week, I think is just part of joyful living, and to me makes a lot of sense. Now, when that comes to be twice a day, then there's a problem. But no, I don't think you outdid it. And in terms of, for people, again, who are looking at calories, which I don't encourage most people to do, I encourage them to focus on healthy food rather than calories. But even for calories, it almost is like your budget. If you go and blow a lot of money on some luxury that you didn't need but you really wanted, well, that's fine, but then you have less money for other things, so it's kind of in the budget. So no, I think if that's done carefully, I think it's part of joyful living.
How do heart medications factor into all this, like Lipitor and things like that? Are they supplemental to a good diet, or if you're on a very good diet, are they no longer useful?
No, they can work together, absolutely. And I think that, whether someone's cholesterol is so high and their risk factors are so high that they need cholesterol medicine, the medicine does not take away the importance of the diet. So it's not like your situation is so bad that now the diet doesn't matter and we're going to switch to the medicine. The diet is always the foundation, the most important, because you can even swamp out the impact of a medicine, a cholesterol medicine, by eating an adverse diet. So they really go hand in hand. Now, if you eat a healthy diet, will your cholesterol always be so great that you'll never need medicine? You know, not necessarily. There are people with genetic predisposition. Now, I was saying that a genetic predisposition certainly is not the full story, but it contributes. So there are a very small percentage of people who have a very severe genetic issue. Their cholesterol will be high no matter what they eat. But even in those people, the diet can either make situations an increment better or an increment worse. So the diet, and again, that's what we're trying to put forward through the work of our nonprofit. The diet and nutrition are always important. They're always the foundation. And in every discussion, whether you're 25 years old and super healthy and no problems, you're just trying to keep yourself that way, or you know, you're 73 and you've had 2 bypass surgeries, the diet is critical in either case. In one case, you want to prevent further problems. The other one, you want to keep yourself healthy. And again, I focused a lot about heart issues, but the diet that's helpful for preventing heart problems is exactly the same diet that's been shown to be protective against many cancers. Again, we can't do everything with nutrition and diet, but you can do a great, great deal. So why not? And you have to eat something, so why not make it the most healthful you can eat? And again, healthy and delicious, as shown here, very much go hand in hand.
Hello. Can you talk a little bit about resveratrol? I hear so much about this and how suddenly red wine is healthy for you. Is that? And I was very excited to hear this, but I'm like, yeah, I think this is probably not really the case. Do you have any comment on the issue?
It's interesting. There's a lot of interesting data in animals showing that resveratrol seems to prolong their life, prolong the life of animals in laboratory studies. And it is one of the ingredients found in higher concentration in things like red wine. However, the amount that has been given to these animals is far greater than you could ever get from the luscious person, you know, drinking red wine. So it's really interesting, and you know, it's a story that's unfolding. So there actually might be more, and there actually might be some very interesting applications. But I would say now the data in humans is far too limited to recommend that. But keep an eye on it. It's an interesting compound. So in terms of whether wine all of a sudden is healthy or alcohol, well, you know, it's interesting. There are very good epidemiologic studies showing for sure in men that a small amount, so this is a standard sized glass of wine, a standard amount of beer, or one standard serving of hard liquor, may be protective, or looks like it's protective for men for heart disease and perhaps for other problems as well. As it is for women, also protective, one serving. However, in women, the story is a bit more complicated because alcohol is also related to the development of breast cancer. So certainly if there's a family history of breast, you wouldn't want people having wine for health. And I don't actually recommend that, oh, I got to go home and have my wine because, you know, it's good for my health and so forth. But if you enjoy alcohol, and, you know, one serving a day for men for sure, for women it's a little bit more controversial, you know, may not, you know, be a bad thing health-wise. The issue for women, although there's a slightly increased risk of breast cancer, there's also a protection against heart problems. And for women, you know, there's actually a greater risk of dying from a heart problem than from cancer. So it's just a little bit more of a double-edged sword. But yeah, it's interesting with alcohol. A little bit, you know, may be helpful for people who enjoy that.
Thank you.
We have one more question over here.
Hello. I was wondering, I know you mentioned vitamins and how they weren't able to capture all of what, you know, like, for example, the spinach was able to capture. Do you recommend vitamins at all, or like to supplement, you know, eating healthy?
You know, I do think there's a role for vitamins. I had specifically, you know, referred to you're replacing dark green leafy vegetables with pills, and there's been no substitute found. There are some instances, I think vitamin D is a vitamin that it's been shown many people are deficient, especially people who live in colder climates and especially in the winter. And vitamin D is produced from sunlight hitting our skin as well as from oral intake. And for many people who live in colder places in the winter, their vitamin D levels just aren't sufficient. So vitamin D for selected people